At my own family's barbecue, my husband handed me divorce papers in front of everyone. His mistress laughed and called me a mechanic's daughter, unworthy of their name. His family cheered her on. They threw me out with nothing. 3 years later, I walked into my own showroom opening and they finally saw who really won. My name is Chloe and this is how I lost everything and then built something they could never take from me again. I need to tell you how it started because none of this makes sense unless you understand who I used to be. I grew up in a small garage behind my father's house. My dad, Walter, fixed cars for a living and I grew up with grease under my fingernails and the smell of engine oil in my clothes. We didn't have much money, but we had each other and my father taught me everything he knew about cars before I even knew how to drive one. I loved it. I loved the way a broken engine could be fixed with patience and the right hands. I never imagined that love would one day save my life. I met Dylan when I was 24. He was charming, confident, and came from a family with real money. His mother owned property across the city, and his father had built a name in business that opened doors just by mentioning it. When Dylan looked at me the first time, I felt like Cinderella meeting her prince. He didn't care that I came from a small house with a workshop in the back, or at least that's what he told me. We dated for a year before he proposed. His family wasn't thrilled, but Dylan insisted he loved me, and for a while that was enough to keep the peace. His mother, Diane, would make comments at dinner about people finding their level, and his sister, Kayla, would ask me strange questions about whether I knew which fork to use at a formal table. I brushed it off. I told myself love was bigger than snobbery. I told myself Dylan saw me, really saw me, and that was all that mattered. We got married in a small ceremony that his family barely tolerated. I remember standing at the altar, looking at Dylan, thinking I had found my person. For the first 2 years, things were good. He was attentive. He held my hand in public even when his family gave disapproving looks. He told me I made him a better man. I believed him completely. But somewhere along the way, things started to shift. It was subtle at first. He started working later. He'd take calls in another room. He'd come home smelling like perfume that wasn't mine. I told myself I was imagining things. I told myself marriages go through phases, and this was just one of them. I wanted so badly to believe the man I married was still there, still choosing me, that I ignored every sign pointing the other way. His family's comments got sharper too. At every gathering, someone would mention how down-to-earth I was in that tone that wasn't a compliment. Deanne once told me in front of guests that she admired how I made do with less growing up. I smiled through it because I thought that's what a good wife did. I thought loyalty meant enduring. Every summer, Dylan's family hosted a massive backyard barbecue. It was practically a tradition, the kind of event where half the neighborhood showed up and everyone dressed like it was a magazine shoot instead of a cookout. I always felt out of place there, but I went every year because Dylan asked me to. That year, something in my gut told me not to go. I couldn't explain it. I just felt a heaviness in my chest the entire morning, like my body knew something my mind hadn't caught up to yet. I got dressed anyway. I remember picking out a simple white dress with soft golden trim, nothing flashy, just something comfortable. Dylan barely looked at me before we left. He was quiet in the car, scrolling through his phone, answering in short sentences when I tried to make conversation. I asked him if everything was okay. He said just work stuff without looking up. I let it go the way I always did. When we arrived, the backyard was already filled with people. Tables were set with white tablecloths, string lights hung between the trees even though it was still daylight, and the smell of grilled meat filled the air. Diane greeted us with her usual tight smile, and Kayla waved from across the yard, deep in conversation with someone I didn't recognize. I remember thinking the day felt different somehow, like everyone knew something I didn't. About an hour in, Dylan asked me to come stand near him by the fire pit. I thought it was sweet, that maybe he wanted a moment together after weeks of distance. Instead, he cleared his throat and the yard slowly went quiet, like people had been waiting for this exact moment. He pulled out a folder from behind a nearby chair. My stomach dropped before he even opened it. He said my name and then he said the word divorce right there in front of his entire family and half the neighborhood. He said it so calmly, like he was announcing a change in restaurant reservations. He told me our marriage had run its course, that he needed someone who understood his world, someone who fit. I stood there, holding the folder he placed in my hands, unable to speak. My ears were ringing. I looked around at the faces watching me, waiting to see how I would react, like I was the entertainment for the afternoon. That's when she walked out from the house. A woman I had seen once before in a photo I found weeks earlier on Dylan's phone that he swore was nothing. Brianna. She walked toward us in a soft cream dress, her arm looping casually into Dylan's like she had done it 100 times before. The crowd didn't gasp. They didn't even look surprised. It hit me then that I was the only person in that yard who hadn't known. Brianna smiled at me, not kindly, but the way someone smiles right before they say something cruel. She said she was sorry it had to happen this way, but Dylan deserved someone who matched his life, not someone who smelled like a garage. She said it loud enough for everyone to hear, loud enough that a few people actually laughed. I felt my face burn. I looked at Dylan, waiting for him to say something, anything to defend me even a little. Instead, he looked away. I asked him quietly at first if this was really happening, if he was really doing this to me in front of everyone. Brianna answered before he could, her voice sharp and mocking, telling me I should feel embarrassed dragging this out publicly, that I was making a scene. I hadn't raised my voice once, I hadn't even moved, but somehow I had become the villain in my own humiliation. Diane stepped forward next, and for one foolish second I thought she might defend me. Instead, she said it was probably for the best, that everyone could see this coming, that some things just aren't meant to last. Kayla wouldn't even meet my eyes. The people I had spent years trying to win over, the family I had defended even when they were unkind to me, stood there and let it happen without a single word in my favor. I turned to Dylan one final time. I asked him directly in front of everyone if he was really choosing her over the life we built together. He looked at me, and for a moment I saw something that might have been guilt, but then Brianna's hand tightened around his arm and he said quietly that it was already decided. He said I should go. I don't remember walking to my car. I don't remember the drive home. I just remember sitting in my driveway for almost an hour, staring at the steering wheel, trying to understand how a life I had built for 8 years could be dismantled in less than 8 minutes. By the time I got inside, I found most of my things already packed. Dylan must have arranged it earlier, which meant this wasn't a spontaneous decision. It was planned, staged. I wasn't just losing my marriage that day, I was losing the illusion that I had ever really mattered to any of them. I moved back in with my father that same week. Walter didn't ask many questions. He just opened the door, helped me carry my bags inside, and made me a cup of coffee the way he used to when I was a teenager upset about something small. I sat at his kitchen table and cried until I had nothing left. He didn't tell me it would be okay. He just sat with me, letting me feel every bit of what had happened. The workshop out back hadn't changed much since I was a kid. Same tools hanging on the same pegboard, same faded sign above the door that read Walter's Auto Repair. Business had slowed over the years. A few loyal customers still came by, but newer, flashier shops in town had pulled most people away. My father was getting older, and I could see the exhaustion in the way he moved around the garage, still trying to do the work of 2 people. The next morning, I woke up and didn't know what to do with myself. I had spent so many years building a life around being Dylan's wife that I didn't know who I was without that title. I sat on the back porch, staring at the workshop, and something in me shifted. I thought about every comment his family had made about where I came from, every time they had looked down on this very workshop like it was something to be ashamed of. And I decided right there that I wasn't going to run from it anymore. I was going to own it. I walked into the garage that afternoon and told my father I wanted to help, not just answering phones or organizing paperwork, but actually working alongside him, the way I used to before I got married and slowly stopped coming around. He looked at me for a long moment like he was trying to decide if I meant it. Then he handed me a wrench and told me to get started on the car in Bay 2. It felt strange at first, getting my hands dirty again after years of manicures and dinner parties I never fit into. But within a few days, something in me came alive that I hadn't felt in a long time. I remembered how much I loved this work, how satisfying it was to fix something broken with nothing but skill and patience. I started coming in early, staying late, learning the parts of the business my father had never had time to modernize. I noticed quickly that the shop was losing money not because the work was bad, but because nobody knew we existed outside our small circle of longtime customers. I started building a simple website. I created social media pages showing our repairs, our pricing, our honesty compared to shops that overcharged people who didn't know better. I answered every message myself. I made sure every customer left knowing exactly what was wrong with their car and why, instead of being confused into paying for things they didn't need. Word started spreading, slowly at first, then faster than I expected. People appreciated being treated with respect, especially women who told me they always felt talked down to at other shops. I built a reputation, one honest repair at a time. My father watched all of this with a kind of quiet pride I hadn't seen from him in years. Within 8 months, we had more customers than we could handle with just the 2 of us. I hired 2 more mechanics. I reinvested every dollar of profit back into new equipment instead of taking a paycheck for myself. A year in, we expanded the shop, adding 2 more bays and a small waiting area that didn't look like it belonged to a repair garage stuck in the past. I started attracting clients who owned expensive cars, people who wanted quality work without getting overcharged by dealership prices. I remember the first time someone drove up in a car worth more than the entire garage. I didn't feel intimidated. I felt ready. That's when Grant walked into my life, though I didn't know yet how much everything was about to change again. His car broke down 2 streets away from the shop and someone recommended us. He walked in wearing a simple gray shirt, nothing flashy, nothing that screamed wealth, even though I'd later learn he was worth more money than most people could imagine. He explained the problem calmly, without the arrogance I expected from someone with expensive taste in cars. I diagnosed the issue myself, walked him through exactly what needed fixing, and quoted him a fair price instead of taking advantage of a stranger who clearly didn't know cars well. He seemed surprised by that. He told me most places would have charged him triple and blamed problems that didn't exist. I told him honesty was the only way I knew how to run a business. He smiled, thanked me, and left once his car was fixed. I didn't think much of it until he came back 2 weeks later for a routine check, even though nothing was wrong. We started talking more during his visits. He asked about the shop, about how I built it, about my life before this. I was honest with him from the beginning. I told him I had been married once, that my ex-husband's family had humiliated me at a party and thrown me out with nothing, that I built this business from the ashes of that humiliation. I told him plainly that I came with a difficult past, and if that wasn't something he wanted to deal with, I would understand. He didn't flinch. He told me the people who mocked me for working with my hands were fools who never understood real worth. He said he respected me more knowing what I overcame to build something out of nothing. Over the following months, what started as casual visits turned into dinners, then long conversations about life, then something I hadn't expected to feel again after everything Dylan put me through. Grant was different from Dylan in every way that mattered. He never once made me feel small for where I came from. If anything, he seemed to admire it more than anything else about me. When he eventually asked me to marry him, I hesitated, not because I didn't want to, but because I was scared of being humiliated again by people who thought status mattered more than character. He told me he didn't care what anyone thought, that he had built his fortune from nothing too, and he recognized the same fire in me that got him where he was. We married quietly, nothing extravagant, just close friends, my father, and the small community that had supported the shop from the beginning. It felt more real than my wedding to Dylan ever had, even without the size or spectacle. For the first time in years, I felt like I was building a life instead of performing one. With Grant's support and using everything I had already built, we decided to open something bigger. Not just a repair shop, but a full luxury car showroom, combining my hands-on expertise with his business connections. We spent months planning every detail, from the building design to the inventory to the kind of experience we wanted customers to have. I wanted it to represent everything I had fought for, proof that where you come from doesn't determine where you end up. The night of the grand opening arrived faster than I expected. We sent invitations across the entire city to business owners, local celebrities, and longtime customers who had supported us since the beginning. The showroom gleamed under soft golden lighting, rows of pristine vehicles polished to perfection, a small orchestra playing quietly near the entrance. I stood at the door in a deep red dress, watching people arrive, feeling a kind of pride I never thought I'd feel again after everything that happened 3 years earlier. I saw them before they saw me. Dylan walked in first, dressed the way he always did for events like this, trying too hard to look effortless. Diane followed behind him, and then Kayla, and finally Brianna, dressed in something that probably cost more than my first car, looking around the showroom like she belonged in rooms like this. They had been invited through a business associate, not realizing whose name was actually behind the opening. I watched Dylan's eyes scan the room until they landed on me. I saw the exact moment recognition hit him, the way his expression shifted from casual confidence to complete confusion. Brianna noticed his reaction and followed his gaze until she saw me too. Her smile faltered instantly. Grant walked over and stood beside me, slipping his hand into mine right as they approached. I could see Dylan's jaw tighten as he pieced together what was happening. This wasn't just some event they had wandered into. This was mine, ours, built from nothing, standing taller than anything his family had ever handed him. Diane was the first to speak, her voice higher than usual, trying to mask her shock with forced pleasantness. She said she had no idea I was involved with something so impressive, that she always knew I had potential. I almost laughed at how quickly her tone shifted from mockery to flattery. I didn't respond right away. I let the silence sit there, let her discomfort stretch a little longer than she was comfortable with. Brianna, never one to stay quiet for long, tried to regain her footing. She said something about the showroom being cute, her voice dripping with the same condescension she used at the barbecue 3 years ago. But this time the room wasn't on her side. This time people around us were whispering about how successful the business was, complimenting the quality of the vehicles, congratulating Grant and me on the opening. Her comment landed flat, swallowed by an atmosphere she no longer controlled. Dylan finally stepped forward, asking if we could talk privately for a moment. I looked at him, really looked at him, and felt nothing but calm. Not anger, not sadness, just clarity. I told him there was nothing left to discuss, that whatever conversation he wanted to have should have happened 3 years ago in that same backyard instead of handing me papers in front of an audience. I told him I hoped he found whatever he was looking for sincerely, because I had already found mine. He tried again, quieter this time, saying he never expected any of this, that he made a mistake. I simply nodded, told him I appreciated him admitting it, and turned back toward my guests. Grant, ever calm, signaled to security nearby, who politely escorted Dylan and his family toward the exit, explaining that the event was reserved for confirmed guests only. There was no shouting, no dramatic scene, just a quiet, firm end to a chapter that no longer belonged in my story. As they walked out, I noticed Kayla glance back at me once, her expression unreadable, somewhere between regret and disbelief. I didn't feel the need to chase closure from her either. Some people only value what they lose after they've lost it, and by then, it's simply too late. The rest of the evening continued as if nothing had happened. Guests mingled, admired the vehicles, celebrated the opening of something my father and I had built with nothing but grit and belief in each other. At one point, I found Walter standing near the entrance, watching the entire room with quiet amazement. He told me he never imagined the small workshop behind our house would lead to something like this. I told him none of it would have been possible without him, without the hands that taught me everything I knew before anyone ever doubted me. Grant found me later that night, standing near the largest window overlooking the city lights. He asked if I was okay after seeing them again. I told him honestly that I felt lighter than I had in years, like a weight I didn't even realize I was still carrying had finally lifted. He pulled me close, and for the first time in a long time, I felt completely at peace with everything that had happened. Looking back now, I understand that losing Dylan wasn't the tragedy I thought it was that day at the barbecue. It was the beginning of everything that actually mattered. Every insult, every humiliation, every moment they made me feel small pushed me toward a version of myself I never would have discovered otherwise. They wanted me to disappear quietly. Instead, I built something they couldn't ignore. If you've ever been counted out by people who should have believed in you, I hope this reminds you that it's never really over until you decide it is. Sometimes the people who throw you away are only making room for something better to find you. I lost a husband that day, but I found myself, and that turned out to be worth far more than anything I left behind. If this story gave you chills, let me know in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe, because next week's story hits even harder.